Okay, so let's talk just about the Treaty of Ghent. We were just talking about the Hartford Convention before. And so one important takeaway is that the Treaty of Ghent does not adhere to any of the demands of the Hartford Convention. I didn't go into detail about those. I do know a lot about them since I was living in New England for so long. So if you're interested, by all means. It's also addressed in Phoner if this is something you want to touch upon in your essay. But otherwise, don't worry about the nuances of that. The other large takeaway of the Treaty of Ghent is that it mandates the British to evacuate their forts that were in the Great Lakes region. This was left over from the Revolution, so this was obviously a huge source of tension between the Americans and the British. And so, really, at the end of the war, the real difference between the beginning and the end was that the US British relationship doesn't change, right? So we have status quo. And I mean, if anything changes, really, it is that the United States independence is that much more apparent. It is much stronger. It is much more economically sovereign. It really indicates to the British that that they no longer can, for lack of a better word, bully the United States. And really, the largest victim of the War of 1812, it was the Native Americans. Tecumseh notably dies in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and he was a very significant leader. And that is a huge, of course, source of it just completely plummets morale, and it allows, of course, for this continued American expansion, or at least the American interest in expansion in the West. And we'll talk about Manifest Destiny pretty soon. All right, last but not least, let's talk about the Battle of New Orleans. This is what puts Andrew Jackson on the map, right? The irony of this is that it took place 2 weeks after the end of the war. And the reason for that is that there was not any communication network, right? There were no telegraphs yet. And so Jackson was, at that point, he had just defeated the Creeks, which was an Indian, not nation, it was an Indian, a smaller tribe within a nation, and it it took place in Florida. Sorry, I just forgot for a second. It took place in Florida, and so that's sort of the context. And this is actually eventually going to result in the Seminole War, which takes place after the War of 1812, where the Seminole Indians in Florida are just battered to shreds by the Americans. But of course, we don't really talk about that in textbooks, so just to let you know, that happened. But in any case, without rambling, Andrew Jackson also kills thousands of British in this battle, so it results in a surge of nationalism. And of course, this is going to give Jackson the sort of credence that he needs to run for president in 1824. He loses that time around, but he comes back with a vengeance in 1828. So we'll talk about that. And this painting, just so you guys know, actually was painted in 1910. And in 1910, the United States is a very different place. This was an American artist, and if you are interested in why 1910 matters a little bit more, why nationalism is an increased trend. I mean, first of all, just think about World War One, right? Oncoming World War One, if anything, and there are a lot more elements to it, but just it's important for us to realize that this painting is not actually created at the time. So I'm going to cut this off now. Hopefully this gives you a good overview of that. We'll pick up with a video tomorrow about the era of good feelings and hopefully the Jackson administration by tomorrow. All right, thanks for listening again.